Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is Joe and Jay Outspoken. You can find all of our media channels at linktree/Joe and Jay Outspoken. Today's episode, we are going to be turning the clock back and going over some 80's music. It's everybody's favorite decade, right?
Oh, man.
Yep. So, yeah, put on your plaid and whatever else. What was popular back then?
I don't know if plaid
The plaid. I had plaid shorts. I hate to admit to that.
I had plaid.
There's a picture of me that I'm guilty.
I used to have my plaid shorts, my polo, my case. Go out there. Remember what case was? And then go down library, play some Dungeons and Dragons. Boom. That's how tough it was.
The study hall. You remember that place?
Detention, wasn't it?
No, the study hall. It was over there by pizza.
The arcade.
The arcade.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that place was awesome.
That was bad.
All right, everybody. Well, you're going to have to bear with us because we're going to go down our own memory lane, but hopefully we'll drag you along with us, and you can, comment about some of the songs that were your favorites and that take you back if you were alive during that time, or for those of you that are a little younger, the 80s have really been brought back quite a bit lately. So let us know what's a favorite song for you from back then. So let's get this started.
Let's go.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the 80s and beyond.
Crime drama we're doing, or like Woody from Toy Story? Oh no, that was actually what's the name? I already forgot his.
I don't know. Was that the 80s? No, I don't think Toy Story.
No, Toy Story was not the 80s.
We're totally getting off on
Clearly, the 80s was so long ago.
Yeah, it kind of was.
Not for us. To us, it was just like the other day. But for many reasons, some people see the 80s as the pinnacle of pop and rock music, right? Synthesizers, catchy melodies, a wide variety of genres to the 1980s, right? Profound influence, or 80s music had a profound influence, and it continues to even today, because you could hear some of these 80s sample songs in today's artists, right? They're sampling some of the 80s music, and it's like weird to hear it because you're thinking, I'm like, but it's in a rap, or it's just different. Eminem does it. Newer rappers does it. LL Cool J. There's these songs that are sampled from the 80s into newer music today. And it's just cool. I think for us, that, right? We were part of that whole thing. So it was pretty cool for us to kind of go through that. And we were of something that has continued even today to live on. That kind of influence that came from the 80s, kind of some of the things that I remember from the 80s. I don't know what.
So the 80s, there was a kind of rise in popularity of bands that had been around in like the 1970s. Mm-hmm. For example, like Van Halen was, one of those bands that was started in the early 70s, but they really started to get fame and popularity in the 1980s, probably late 70s, but early 80s. So, and they actually, one of their albums was called 1980. So that was a big thing you had bands like, The Cure. That's another whole genre. And they were in the late 70s, but they really didn't gain, super popularity until they hit the 80s. AC/DC was a band that was, kind of started in like 1973, and they had a bunch of different songs that came out. So like You Shook Me All Night Long came out in 1980, and Back in Black, which was one of their really popular songs, and
Bells,
one of their albums, and Hell's Bells, and all those, and those all came out in 1980. So the 1980s really took off, and then you had the bands that actually came out in the 80s, like Depeche Mode, Bon Jovi, of course, like Guns N' Roses. And these are, if you start to think about it, these are all bands that go boingo.
Oh, I love Boingo Boingo. I don't know.
Wham.
Wham.
Wham was, they were really big. Aha. Yep. Aha.
Aha.
Yeah, that's it. For those of you that don't know, that's actually the name of the band. So
about anything, it was just aha.
Think about how popular like the Red Hot Chili Peppers are now, and they came out in 1982. There's a lot of Culture Club, right? Boy George, your ex. They came out in those
foul of him. Anyway,
yeah, all these bands, really that are still popular today that people still listen to and that are played on radio or
some have even tried to come
and stuff like that.
Some have even tried to come up now in this era,
right,
with newer music, and it's cool to see. But the 80s was a golden rock and pop, so everything was new back there. Everything was like, so it's that we're just starting heard of that different, like the technology, right? That they started with techniques, right? With the usage of like drum machines, something that wasn't popular back then. Your drummer, it was all about just the real. You had drum sets, you had bass, you had had everything there. You had your snare drums, you had everything was set up. Now you're talking about drum machines, synthesizers, right? Keeps lines, right? That just continuous little beats that would play in the background,
right?
And just music technology in general that gained popularity in the 80s. With some of the rappers who was, in fact, one of the rappers that came out of, I think he started in 79, but in 1980 he released his album, which was called Curtis Blow. You remember Curtis Blow, right?
Yeah.
He a lot of synthesizers and things like that were used because of the drum beats and things like that behind them. So it was really interesting to see how the 80s kind of started developing these different genres that started coming up. Also, that was big back there in the 80s, guitar solos. The guitar solos started coming in a lot in a lot of these musics, and people just love those things,
Right.
And that being in the bands and being in bands for so many years, we just love to rock to that, that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
the guitar solos really didn't fade out until you got into the 80s when what's their name, Nirvana hit the scene. So before that, I mean, if you were in a band, you had to have a guitar solo in there somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is every couple years the music changed so much. I mean, from one couple years to the next. And so if you take 1980 itself, 3 songs that came out that year was "Call Me" by Blondie. Remember? Call Me. And "Celebration" by Kool and the Gang. Celebrate. Everybody knows that. Yeah. And another one, "Bites the Dust" by Queen.
Yep.
Now, when you think of those songs are now I said came out. A couple of those songs came out a little bit before that, but 1980s when they became
popularized,
became a hit. So right. So they might have been in 78, 79 kind of thing, but 1980 is when those songs were. Now, all of those songs, when you think about them, especially us, because we were raised during that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were only 2 or 3 years old at that time, folks. But so when we were raised during that time, those songs make you like, those feel really old, especially like "Celebration" from Kool and the Gang. That feels really old.
That's actually feels 70s to me.
Doesn't it?
It does, because I hear it. I'm like, that's a 70s song. And I'm like, wait a minute. No, it's not. It's just because it was so early in the 80s. It gives you that feel of because the music, the sound, almost that breaking line from disco. You know what I mean?
That's exactly what it was, because we were moving out of that. And exactly like you said, disco was one of the genres that really started to bring in that electronic music, where it started adding keyboards. And then you had really the bands that started to bring that stuff big time in was like your bands from England, like the Duran Durans of the world and stuff like that used, synthesized bass or keyboard. Now, they had an awesome bass player in Duran Duran that played real bass, but a lot of that stuff was recorded with that afterwards. And then you had like Depeche Mode and bands like that.
Do you remember, remember OMD? Bro, I just remember.
Oh, yeah.
Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. That was a band, bro. So white in high school. Oh, my God.
So 1980, "Call Me," "Celebration," and another one, "Bites the Dust." That feels so far back. 2 years later, in 1982, you had some of the biggest hits of all the 80s. "Beat It" from Michael Jackson.
Never heard of him.
1999 by Prince.
Never heard of him.
And "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me" by your ex.
Yes, that one was the number one song.
Yeah. So and think of those 3 songs, how much farther along those feel than just 2 years after these other songs.
But here's something that's kind of amazing, right? And we could look at a couple of examples from the 80s. Michael Jackson, Madonna, Prince. they've surpassed the 80s, got into the 90s, and even into 2000. Oh, yeah. You know, that's how important the 80s was at some of the, and I'm saying those because those are the top ones, but even bands like AC/DC still like are out when some of their stuff, you know, people are dying off, but you know, we're old now, but yeah. What they have surpassed time. You know what I mean? And those they're still relevant. People still listen to them. And in fact, a lot of the newer bands that start popping up in the scenes in early 2000s, right? And the type of music that they played. And I think they kind of combined different types of music and started bringing up like the times and things like that, where they started kind of putting a little bit of more island stuff into their music. The core of it was these 80s band, and like I said, Donna, Michael Jackson, Prince, are just to name a few of the ones that surpassed time, right? And they're relevant up until like the 2000s, until that doctor killed Jackson. But anyway,
these are the things we do not speak.
I know, but the other thing we need to remember is the sounds, man. They were positive, they were optimistic. They, you know, the 80s had a tendency to sound upbeat, bro. I think that's the biggest thing, and optimistic about life in general. You know, which appealing during like pressing moments. Like you have songs today that talk about, they're just sad, bro. You listen to them and they, you know, they might have a good beat to them, but if you listen to the lyrics, they're talking about just sad stuff, you know. And of course you always have country music, which is always depressing, right? Because so you got your dog, it's a beer, and the girl left you, and you know, it's always the same thing. But the point is that the sound was different. You didn't have a lot of cursing, right? And not until to late when NWA came out that, you know, a lesson. But Curtis Blow, none of them really brought that kind of music, the positive, optimistic kind of music. It was chill and celebratory, you know. It was like a party, bro, a party every day, you know. And pop songs in the 80s had that power, bro, to kind of release
party all the time,
endorphins and serotonin, you know, all flowing through the brain. You know what I'm saying? So it enhanced emotions, it relaxed people, it made intent, and I think those are the key things that we've gotten when music, you know. Now it's more popularity, more is about, you know, you got people that just love to rap and diss other rappers. You got mumble rappers that you can't even understand what they're saying, right? There's so many things have changed in music altogether, and I really miss 80s. I mean, you know, you've driven with Ford, you know, I got my little 80s music that I love listens to all the time still, you know. And like, you remember Toto?
Oh yeah,
you know, and here's some that people have forgotten. Tina Turner, Sade. Remember Sade?
Yeah, Sade.
It's a great one. That, you know, she had love music. You know, Tina Turner, and like, you know, that I think of Tina Turner. I think of movie
Mad Max.
Thunderdome. You know what I mean? And then you have
Blaster,
and then the soft kind of noise metal, right? Twisted Sister, Quiet Riot, right? You remember all?
Is he called noisy metal?
Noisy metal, bro. It's just noisy metal, you know? Because they're so. It was just like, well, remember Twisted Sister? What was that song?
We're not gonna take it.
Yeah. Noisy. Yeah, she had like Human
Human
League and Phil Collins, bro. Don't forget Phil Collins.
Oh yeah, see, Human League was great. Dude, Phil Collins is one of those guys. When he was with Genesis and then you know, doing his solo stuff, he did so many popular songs. I mean, you know, they did what was it, In the Air Tonight, which has one of the most popular drum solos that was ever played. You know, the do. And that was in what show? Miami Vice, right? So it's just amazing, all of the things that he was involved with and how many times the songs were at the top of the charts. You know, he was just a great songwriter. And
Elton John had some that great music with Elton John, and they had a band, bro. They had they had music. They had all the sounds that you needed in his bands. You know what I mean? You had sax, you had horns, all kinds of things going on. You know, but I like remember when what was it? Candle in the Wind.
Oh yeah,
you know,
about Princess Diana.
Yeah, so just so many good music back in the days that and a lot of these contributed and they played together. We can't forget. We also had, you know, for us Latinos, the 80s of music, right? I know you weren't really into that. In our senior year, our grand night, a lot of those freestyle bands were at Disneyland. I like VB, Expose. Like I can't remember. Right, my mind's crushed. But you had
they were on the what was that stage called? Videopolis. The Videopolis stage. Yeah, Janet Jackson made that popular because she
Miss
filmed
Jackson,
a
if you're
video
nasty.
there. Yeah, exactly that one.
Yeah, but I didn't even know
she
that.
Kinda made that
Videopolis, it's called
Videopolis. Yeah, it was backed by. Gosh, I'm trying to think
Frontierland.
where that was. It was over closer to where Small World was at, kind of towards the back of the park.
Got it.
It doesn't. I think it's a performing stage now. I haven't been to Disneyland so long. I don't.
Yeah, I think the last time I took my kids and now they're adults. So, yeah, I don't. But we had for the freestyle we had like TKA, we had Johnny O, Diamond Girl, I'm sure, Seduction, Stacy Expose, the Cover Girls, Steve, he was there too at the Grand Night. Debbie Dead, Jam,
Lisa,
and the Call Jam. You remember? I know you heard at least some of these.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you went to dances and stuff like that, they didn't play Guns N' Roses. They played all these freestyle sing and dance and
man, those dances in the 80s. But see, that's the thing. Like the music today, you can't really like go and dance to, right? So 80s songs, you used to be able to dance to a lot of this music, even like the old Curtis Blow and Houdini and LL Cool J songs, you were able to. Today, you have to mix or synthesize it in a way to give it a beat to be able to dance to, and it's just, to me, it's just so different. Like, I love today's like country. I love country music. So I love today's country music. I do like some metal and some of but some of them are still like older bands. They're not even like the newer ones. The 80s, I think, gave us that listen like to all genre of music, because that's what we had. We had like we didn't know what some of these songs were part of what genre. We were like, what, that's different. You know what I mean? I think slowly it started produce these different genres, and I think it finally broke up into just a variety of songs, like from pop to rock to freestyle to just to different types of music. And I think as kids or living in the 80s, we loved every moment of it. We loved to experience. I know you had your little Levi's denim jacket with your band buttons on there, bro. I know you. I used to see you down 10 Wing doing those things, man. So don't even lie.
10 Wing.
I saw you.
Yeah, if you know, you know.
If you know, you know, bro.
You know what? That is one thing I never owned. I never owned a jean jacket.
Bro, I had two. I had the regular one and the one with the little wool inside. Remember the one with the wool?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because it got cold sometimes. So I had to get
the woolly jackets. Yeah. Yeah, I never had. I don't remember. I remember having a members only jacket.
Bro, why would you admit that right here, bro?
Had the little snaps up here.
You put your little beret in there?
That was probably the only piece of like popular brand name clothing that I ever had, besides for Vans. I had Vans because we'd go to the
Date Festival, baby, get 2 for $10.
Yeah. Yeah, because so back in those days, people now are like Guess jeans, who cares, whatever. Guess jeans were the jeans to have in those days. Like that was like and Jordache for
those were always popular.
Levi's were always popular. Yeah, girls, I think, and guys could do Guess.
Girls,
Jordache was basically just women.
But girls wore Guess to death. They had the Guess shorts, they had the Guess pants, the purses, everything was Guess.
I never ever once owned a pair of Guess pants.
Neither did I.
I just had regular.
You know what I did have? But you know what I did have?
Huh.
Some Cavaricis. With the 15 buttons, and then you fold it over like that. It was sexy as hell, bro.
Yeah.
I don't think you're judging me every time I say my Cavaricis, bro.
Hey, you had those. I had a members only jacket. We were in the same club.
We were. Hey, bro. Cavaricis is top of the line, all right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you think so. So, yeah, there was a lot of changes that happened from. So, we kind of started at the beginning of this where you had, like Celebration from Kool and the Gang. And by the time you get to the end of the 80s, when you're in 1989, so you had a big change of music styles coming up, because that was at the end of the decade.
Yeah.
And you have, like this, everybody's tired of all the stuff. Because if you go back to, so I'll get back to 1989 right now. If you go back to like, say, 1986, 87, Yeah, Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, Pour Some Sugar on Me by Def Leppard. So that was the peak of time for those kind of bands, the hair metal bands, the Hollywood strip bands, whatever you want to call them. By the time you hit 1989, the most popular songs for that year was like Fight the Power by Public Enemy, Pump Up the Jam, Bust a Move by Young MC.
I remember.
Now, you had Depeche Mode, wholly different kind of band. Personal Jesus, that came out, right? You had De La Soul, Me, Myself, and I.
Yeah.
Totally different. Love Shack by
B-52s.
Way different music. Like a Prayer by Madonna. Way different music than the rest of those. So you had this.
But the B-52s, that was almost like 50 style music, like 60s.
It was.
The B-52s.
So the end of that decade, you had such a change in what was, going to be into the 90s, right?
Yeah.
And then as soon as 91 came around and you had the Nirvanas of the world and everything,
Salt and Pepper.
The rock side of things, the rock side of things really moved things, in another direction. Because just a year before that, in 88, you already had, the bands like NWA came out with F the Police, and Wild Thing came out that year from
Tone Loc.
And so Rob Bass, It Takes Two, that one came out. I'm trying to think of what else. Now the
MC Hammer.
The MC Hammer, the hair metal, right? The Guns N' Roses and Def Leppard and all these bands, that was starting to fade, right? In 1988, Metallica came out with One.
Love that song.
It was probably their most popular.
Still is.
Definitely up to that point, yeah. And that really started to change things because people were like, we want this kind of rock, we don't want this old hairspray and makeup rock and roll. We want these guys. And so the end of the decade really started to change quite a bit. So rock was really dying out. It was going a completely different direction.
Metal scene of grudge rock,
which came in at basically in the early 90s, which kind of swept away all this music that was in the 80s. Because the 80s, exactly like you said, were known for either the type of freestyle music that was going on or for the quote unquote hair metal that was going on, because when you were in the middle part during 1985 and 1986. So 1985 was a good year for a lot of the top 40-esque type of music. In 1985, this about me, a really awesome movie came out. It's called Back to the Future. And Huey Lewis and the News did a song called The Power of Love for that song, for that movie. And that shot to the top, right? So, and you had a lot of songs that had kind of that feel to them, right? But was from all these different kind of artists and bands that weren't in the same genre. But they were all top 40, pop-ish, rockish.
Yeah.
So you had Money for Nothing by Dire Straits came out, Into the Groove by Madonna. Okay, so those are two completely different genres of music, right? A Madonna fan is probably not a Dire Straits fan, but all of this was coming out in the middle because everything was changing so much. Word Up by Cameo, remember that?
Cameo, yeah. But see, the thing,
Word Up.
and that's another thing about the 80s, you had a lot of one-hit wonders that came out.
A lot.
Great songs that came out. The song was a hit, and then everything after that was really not as popular, or it wasn't catching enough audience attention to create an album, right? Because the 80s was also a point where it transitioned so fast, right? You didn't have time, whether you liked it or you didn't like it. That was what's happening in the 80s. And if you liked it, there were more records. Didn't like it, it kind of fizzled out and died, right? So, but you could see how quickly the music was changing, from the hits to the metal bands, right? To it just created so much different types of music within that genre, where even the genres themselves started breaking up. You didn't have just now you had metal, you had just it came from that noisy rock to just to help with Metallica, try to keep up with that, right? And a lot of them kind of didn't. But there was I just feel there was so much transitioning, so much new music coming up that it was developing as it most we see new music styles come out. Not so often. We kind of have all the genres already. But you in the 80s would see them slowly, like you showed us, right? You had Madonna, Prince, whatever going on. All of a sudden, you got Curtis Blow. You got, then all of a sudden it goes into NWA, then LL Cool J, then MC Hammer. It just starts progressing and moving, and you get Wild Thing from Tone Loc, and just. But again, those were some of those were one hit wonders. NWA then broke up, and then that's where you got your Ice Cubes of the world. So even rap, progressed, right? Because then you started getting the world, right?
Oh yeah,
and then and then that turned in because NWA started with that kind of gangster rap, and then of course Tupac and along with Suge Knight, and they took it into a East and West Coast.
Watch what you say about
East
him.
Coast. I'll take them all, man. And it became then a West Coast East Coast kind of battle, and it just music was just happening so fast in the 80s that we were lucky because of those transitions that we were able to enjoy such a large genre of music. I think so.
Heck yeah, man. It was such a great time because there was so much music to enjoy, and if you didn't like one thing, there was definitely something else out there for you. Something that I've kind of saved till the fourth quarter of our episode here is the thing that really kicked off the popularity of the 80s. So you would say, well, there was a lot of popular music in the 60s and the 70s and even going back to the 50s, you had the Big Bopper, if you go back to the 50s and then the 60s, you have like Janis Joplin and stuff. And then you get to the 70s, you got the Rolling Stones or whatever. So the 80s, the reason it was so impactful and music became such a big thing at that time, it wasn't because music was better or anything like that. In 1979, so 1 year before 1980, right? If you're a math wizard, there was a video that was filmed, and it was called "Video Kills the Radio Star," and it was the first video to ever be played on a little station called MTV. And MTV,
"Video Kill the Radio Star,"
right?
That song.
Yeah, and it completely changed the decade.
Revolutionized
completely
the music industry.
Oh, absolutely. And
and don't even play music.
I know, it's funny. Well, because there's so many other avenues for people to get music videos and view.
Dr. Dre, that was the other guy.
Oh, Dr. Dre. Yeah, there was, and the personalities on MTV,
video DJs. VJs, they called them
VJs, right? Video jockeys instead of DJs, disc jockeys. It was
instead of BJs. Oh, I had wrong.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't have wanted one from Mark Goodman. So, So some of the people, I don't know if you remember any of these names. There was Mark Goodman and Alan Hunter, Nina Blackwood.
I remember Nina Blackwood. Yep.
J.J. Jackson, Martha Quinn, Adam Curry.
Adam Curry was a very popular one. Adam Curry was.
He was really popular because he had and he came in at that time. He had the long hair. And then later on in that decade, Ricky Rackman came in and kind of took over Adam Curry's spot as the heavy metal kind of.
Wasn't the news guy for MTV?
He was. But he had the lion's mane hair. He had really long hair, good looking guy and everything. Yeah. And I saw an interview with him not too long ago, maybe a month or two ago or something like that. It might have been filmed earlier than that, but I saw it within the last couple months. And he is he's totally accepted Christ, and he's like, I'm so happy I was able to influence so many people. But at that time, I didn't understand what the world was about. They had started that whole deal.
They're pioneers in the video music.
They were and he's like, half the time we'd come in and they're like, okay, this is what we're gonna do for today. We don't have a roadmap totally, because exactly what they were pioneers at that time. And by the end of the 80s, if you did not have a music video on MTV, you weren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Period. So now record companies not only had to put up money to pay the band, to pay for a tour, to pay for a recording, which was extremely expensive back then. People do not realize that, being from that industry, what's called a Neve console, which is when you imagine an old recording studio, that board that has just sliders and knobs and everything all over it. Some of the best ones were made by Rupert Neve is his name, but they just called them Neve consoles. Those things were anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 for one console. So every recording studio had those in them, right?
Jeez.
And that didn't include microphones and the building itself and all this kind of stuff. And this is what that was the investment, and this is what the record labels had to pay for to get the band recorded. Then they got to pay the band themselves, and then they got to pay to get the band out on the road and
Tours and what?
Tours and it's expensive.
Merchandising.
I mean, you rent
there's all
trucks and merchant. Yeah. And of course they made a lot of money back if the band popped. You know, if you had a Madonna or a Michael, oh my gosh, a Michael Jackson or something like that, you just made tons of money off these bands. I mean, the like the Beatles catalog and stuff like that, they're still making money to this day. And Michael Jackson is too, you know. These are Kiss is a big one. Gene Simmons he was a smart businessman.
They're still rocking too, man.
Yeah.
I don't know how they put that makeup and elevators on, but they're doing it.
Yeah.
These are
Yep. The last one I'll say, and you'll remember her from MTV, is Downtown Julie Brown.
Julie Brown. Yeah, remember Downtown Julie Brown.
Yeah, she was awesome. Somebody else that came out of there that got popular outside of MTV, but she kind of made her start in there was Daisy Fuentes.
Remember her? Fuentes. Yeah. Didn't that weird thing come out in MTV first?
Carson Daly was on there too at one time.
Remember Max?
Max Headroom. Yeah. That was that's an interesting, the whole story with it, because there was actually a movie that they did, because he was like, what did they use him
Pepsi?
for? He was Pepsi had him, but they had him on all kinds of shows, and he would be like the announcer kind of thing.
It's
it was weird because it had like the yellow and black stripes behind it and stuff, and he'd like glitch, you know, whatever. But there was an actual movie made from the actual guy that plays that character, and it was totally regular. Did you ever see it?
No.
Very few people did, because it was really obscure, really weird. But how did he get Max Headroom as his name? Well, he runs into this, like the top of a bridge where it says Max Headroom 8 feet or whatever. And he hits that, and that's the last thing he remembers. And now he's in this digital world. So that's where the name came from. Yeah. Yeah. It was pretty crazy. I don't even recommend you looking it up or watching it, because it was zero good.
Yeah. but these are the things that were popular back then, along with cassettes. You know, you had the cassettes, and you'd be listening to this music. And we, you know, one of the things that I remember in high school was that at an open campus, if you remember that, and all we used to do, we'd grab some food. We'd have music on. You'd go out to the parking lot. You had the doors open. People had their music going on. It was just about the music back then. Like everything we did was about music. We had games. They always had music going on, right? And then the band was in, but they always had some kind of pre-recorded music. Always so popular in high school. And variety of songs. And it was just, I think music, it just came down in the 80s, really impact on those times, right? I think we grew up listening to music. We grew up listening to these songs. We grew up like kind of hear the song "Born in the USA." You know, you're patriotic. You're listening. You're jamming to these songs. You know what I mean?
Right.
And American Life that way. I think it was in the 90s, but you hear this music, and some of these were inspiring. Some of these were just relaxing. Some of these you sent to your girl because you loved. Remember the mixtapes? That's popular in the 80s. Was a mixtape, right? So you had I
remember making. You remember Kim?
Yeah,
I made her a mixtape because it was her first time ever flying.
Yeah,
and I made her a mixtape, and I was like,
Walkman,
you know. For Walkman. Yeah, that's actually what it was for. And she had that on the airplane, and I was like, and I knew all of her songs that she liked, and I, had CDs or whatever, and I don't even know if it was CDs, man, because what I gave her was an actual cassette. But I had because I had a mixer and all that stuff playing in the band, I was like, all right, you're probably at 40,000 feet now. Here's your favorite song. Blah, blah. So I kind of DJ'd it for her. And I remember when she came back, she was like, that was so stupid, but it was so cool.
Like if you were all of a sudden, you had that high school crush, and you're like, oh my God, you had to get it. Bro, she didn't make it to you unless she had a mixtape, bro. You know what I mean?
That's right. You
go to your buddies like, hey, bring me a mixtape, and it'd be all the love songs, all the corny love songs would be on there. And
that's one thing that the youngsters don't understand now, because you just put on whatever, Spotify, Pandora, or whatever, your YouTube music or whatever. And back then, like, you had a couple cassettes that were
TDK, baby. Remember the TDK?
TDK. One cassette was like your your driving music, whatever
Yeah.
you like to drive to.
Yeah,
And then another one was like your favorites. And then another one was when the girls are in the car, you have all their songs that that they're going to like. Yeah. And here's a big one too. So the beginning of the 80s, you have the emergence of MTV, right?
Yeah.
Which is just blockbuster for everything. Nowadays, people are like, MTV, who cares? They show stupid programs and stuff. It was
music.
really huge for music at that time. Another thing,
music television. You guys didn't know what MTV stand for.
Right. The 80s was a huge, huge, huge transition period for music media. Records or LPs or albums, whatever you called them, had been around for a long time, right? And they're still around today, which is crazy. We're parked in 2024. Yeah, 2001. Odyssey. This is an old episode. 2024, and we still have albums out there, right? So it's a format that's probably never going away. What was trying to replace LPs or albums for a little while, and that was kind of breaking in the early 80s, and then it kind of ended right at the beginning of the early 80s, was 8-track, right? The new medium that had come up that basically destroyed 8-track. Because I remember, I'm trying to think whose car it was. I want to say it was my aunt's car. Had an 8-track player in the car.
8-track adapter where you had to put in there and you put the cassette in the 8-track, and then
yeah.
My brother's car.
Yeah, exactly. And then cassette or what did we call them? Tapes. We just called them tapes. Yeah. But cassettes, those became really popular, and they were much smaller, and you could carry more of them with you. The deck was way smaller and everything.
But you never did. You always had that little case of the 20 that you'd put in and carry in your trunk. Don't play.
Yeah. But the problem was because we always lived in the desert, so you couldn't leave those things in the car, man. They'd melt and get all crazy.
Remember how cool it was? How you used to walk
the pencil. You had to put the pencil in it to rewind them.
Hey, do you remember how cool you used to look when you used to pull your tape deck out of your car and you walk in a class with their tape deck? It was so gay.
The entire head unit pulled out. Yeah. They actually call it a pull out. Do you have a pull out stereo? That's so cool.
I had 3 kids.
So towards the end of the 80s is when CDs came out and gained their popularity, right? So you have this whole arching thing of albums, 8-tracks, cassettes, and CDs all in one decade. So we have the beginning of music videos, right, which changed everything. Yeah. You have the full changing of media platforms, where you finally got the CD, which if you really think about it, they don't really sell CDs much anymore because everybody's went to, streaming digital MP3 platform or what have you. And technically, if they're recorded properly, are at a higher bit rate and are cleaner, and the digital sound is better than the MP3s and stuff. Those have what they call lossless. They take frequencies out, and anyways, it dumbs the sound down. So they technically don't sound as good as an actual old school at this point CD sounds, right? But that was the start of what we have now for digital formats, all digital, MP3, MP4, all those kind of things. So yeah, it's pretty crazy how influential and how important the 80s were for music. And I think that's one of the reasons, kind of come full circle on this, that the 80s were so impactful for music, and why it's going to be kind of timeless, even though some of it is like, oh my gosh, that darn 80s stuff. It is still very popular in pop culture. They still use a ton of 80s music in film,
sampling
and
so like,
sampling.
I think
absolutely.
In a nutshell, I think 80s was revelatory in so many things, in the way made, the way music was made. Right. I think there was so much going on. There was technology just being thrown out there. Apple was created, Microsoft was out. Just so much stuff was happening in the 80s, and all those.
Exactly.
And the crazy thing is that all those companies were trying together to get a better product. And I think we talked about this back when we did the 80s movies, from laser disc to Blu-ray to, every satellite, everything changed. Everything was kind of rising into what it is today. Right. And music is the same thing. All the music today had its in the 80s,
Yeah, absolutely.
And not to take away from the 70s and the 60s and the 50s, because a lot of that music did get absorbed into the 80s, but with the addition to all the was brought into the music industry, because technology was developing at an ever high rate. created new sounds and music, and just how, everything was put together, I think was revolutionized the music industry. And you know that you work in the music industry, so it even today it continues to develop. And I know you talked about the albums. The only reason albums are being supply and demand. People now are going crazy to have a record player in their house. They're like, oh my God, that's so cool. And they're out there looking, they're going to the vintage stores buying albums,
right.
But they're still making albums now. But if you get like an old school, if you
they're actually building them better now because they're 180 gram vinyl.
But now you go to a DJ, like modern DJs, you go look at their turntables, it's all digital. There's no records on there. They'll throw an MP3 song onto that unit, and this table, and it does the effects like it did when the old time DJs that had real records were scratching and whatnot, and remember that time? Remember wiki. Anyway, but I think a lot to offer, and I think a lot of people need to kind of Gen Xers, I know, reminisce of these, because man, that's some good times. We didn't have a lot of problems back then, other than cocaine. But other than that, I think everything was fine.
Cocaine,
the grumpy boomers, and they clearly never liked the music that was coming up in the 80s.
Right. Well, it's funny because you kind of hit on a point, and we'll get out of here after this. But, VHS came out in the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. I think in the early 70s. So VHS floated all the way through the 80s. Honestly, VHS didn't fully die out until the early 2000s. It's crazy to think it lasted that long. But the 80s, again, is a big time when VHS became big, because in the 70s, in the early 70s, people didn't have money for them. Those machines were really expensive. Video stores weren't a big deal.
My parents need millimeter.
Right. So video stores became a huge in the 80s. They weren't in the 70s, and then they kind of died out in the 90s, right? So that decade was really big for that. Well, the thing is Laserdisc came out at the very end of the 70s. So basically it didn't hit the market until 1980, and it kind of died out in that decade, right? Because DVDs came out in 1994 or something like that. So Laserdisc had a really short run. Basically
they're this big. They're huge.
They were really big, and you had to flip them over and everything. And there was only a couple. I'm trying to think of who it was that actually did like concerts on those big platforms. So you'd have and what's crazy about thinking about Laserdisc, and you think, okay, well, it's like DVD quality. It kind of wasn't. It was like 480p. It was really low quality. Damn. So it was better than VHS, but then you had VHS turned into super VHS that they had.
Edge VHS.
Yeah, and digital VHS that was, pretty decent, but
I think the consoles to play them were twice as big as the Laserdisc.
Those things were, and what's funny with Laserdisc is you played a movie, and then like halfway through the movie it would stop, and you had to flip it, open the thing and flip it over. Yeah, it was crazy, but the 80s were awesome, and really,
you know why? Because we're awesome. Because we're awesome. Thank you.
That's got to be the reason. So, all right, everybody, thanks so much for joining us again. If it's your first time here, definitely hit the like and subscribe button and a little bell notification icon so you get updates whenever we post. We post every single Tuesday. We don't miss a Tuesday. And
once.
Did we?
No, we didn't. Did we?
Long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
No, we still posted something on a Tuesday. Yeah, we had, that was technical difficulties in our early days.
Oh.
But we still posted on that Tuesday. But yeah, so every Tuesday we launch a new episode. It can be one of our general episodes like this. We do our men's edition, which is really, really cool. We cover a lot of things in mental health and just stuff about guys, and it's not just for guys. For ladies, if you come in, you might learn a couple things or say, oh, no wonder my boyfriend's a jerk, that's why. Or you can chime in and then help us out in the next upcoming episodes on that. And then we've started a new series. We're going to be coming up on our third episode in our series, Dark Crime. So that's been, pulled a lot of good vibes out there. So anyhow, hope you guys have a great week. Remember, take care of one another.
Do and be better.
And as always,
God bless America.
America.
We'll see you again.
See you next Tuesday.